So just briefly, introduction to Appalachian Voices. We are an environmental nonprofit that works across multiple states in Appalachia. We focus on uh, fighting against or fighting for a sustainable economy and environment in Appalachia, with a focus on Central Appalachian states for the most part. And historically, we worked on mountaintop removal and other coal and extraction related issues, but a few years ago, we started developing programs focused on expanding access and opportunities around clean energy in Appalachian communities, and that's where we started our Energy Savings for Appalachia program. The goals of that program are reducing energy costs for Appalachian residents through on-bill finance programs, and that helps to not only reduce energy usage, but alleviate poverty as well, while promoting new jobs in local communities in Appalachia, particularly in communities that have high poverty rates and high unemployment rates and are seeing a transition away from extractive-based economies. And we're focused on rural electric cooperatives because primarily they serve those communities that are rural, where you see a lot higher rates of poverty and unemployment and lower economic diversification. But they're also member-owned, and because outreach and education is a portion of our approach, that plays into the fact that members have a voice in how their electric cooperative is run and what programs their cooperative offers. And we have a multi-pronged approach that focuses on everything from grass tops to grassroots outreach and education and consultation. So, and so far to this date, we have been extremely successful in that approach, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So just a brief overview. I'm going to start off by kind of illustrating how and to what extent energy waste is an economic problem in the Southeast, and what the potential is for expanding energy efficiency opportunities with a focus on the residential sector, but also looking at what that potential is. And again, like I mentioned, on-bill financing is a means for maximizing the economic impact and maximizing those investments in energy efficiency. And I'll talk a lot about on-bill financing best practices and highlight some case studies. And also about what is needed to achieve that energy efficient economy throughout the Southeast. And then we'll finish with a question and answer session. So why is energy waste an economic problem? This seems like something that would be obvious to most folks, but we don't talk about it as a problem as much as we should, because when people think of economic problems, they think of higher level kind of issues such as jobs, and then when you think about costs for residents, the greater conversation is around healthcare, housing costs, transportation, education, all those types of things. And so energy costs don't get enough airtime, I would say. But higher energy costs for families have a significant impact, and for businesses. But focusing on the families, they can have a significant impact and exacerbate poverty where poverty exists, obviously. But for anybody living in poverty, energy costs, particularly given that they're likely to have an inefficient home, can play a significant burden, pose a significant burden on that family. And by wasting energy and paying higher bills for, so that's just an illustration, that's just one home. So how much energy do we waste? This is a chart that Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory puts out every year. Kind of shows how energy is generated and it flows through different sectors of the economy, and along the way how much of that energy is wasted. And economy-wide, for a number of reasons, most predominantly the fact that most of our electricity generators, our centralized generation, is highly inefficient in converting the fuel to energy. We waste 61% of all the energy from the input to the output pathway. But when you look at the residential sector of the energy that enters the residential sector, 35% of that energy ends up being wasted, for the most part due to inefficient homes and inefficient appliances. And so that's kind of a huge problem, not only economy-wide, but particularly for the individual sectors that are affected. is really frustrating. Is it? I apologize. Is everybody else seeing this go to bar pop out as I'm going through this?
No, we're not seeing it, Rory.
Okay. All right. I'll show us through. And in the Southeast, we see a disproportionate amount of energy waste compared to most of the rest of the nation. And this is just one illustration of that. This is the state ranking that the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy puts out every year. And it ranks states based on a number of factors, including policies or building codes that promote and result in energy efficiency, utility and other sector investments in energy efficiency. And so you can see that of all the states in the U.S., except for North Carolina, every southeastern state falls in the bottom half of the rankings for their policies and energy efficiency investment in 2015. Some of the states are improving, but for the most part, the Southeast region has a lot more that can be done to promote energy efficiency investments throughout the economy. And ACEEE and the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance recently had a webinar highlighting the results of a study that ACEEE did on energy waste or energy burden, particularly for low-income families throughout the U.S. And they compared the national averages to the Southeast. And you can see, as it notes, national averages are in black and Southeast averages are in blue. And while it doesn't seem like a significant difference, across, when you look at the median annual utility cost per square foot and the median energy burden, which represents the amount of gross household income spent on energy bills, the Southeast residents in the Southeast, families in the Southeast spend a greater portion of their income on energy bills. And when we look at the low-income sector, you can see that percentage is substantial across the U.S., but also in the Southeast at 8.2% on average of low-income families spending their income on energy bills. And the Southeast states also have a high number of those low-income households. These are the 11 states that are covered by the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. And you can see the total number of homes in the region is about 29.3 million. And nearly 40%, nearly 2 out of every 5 homes can be categorized roughly as low income. And that's, for the purposes of this chart, less than $35,000 in gross household income. And so that's a significant number of homes that potentially are facing a fairly high energy burden just based on the fact that they do not make much money. And this, just going back to the ACEEE report, energy costs approximate 8% of household income compared to 2.5% for non-low income. So that is a disproportionate impact on low-income families. And a significant number of homes, nearly 11.1 million homes throughout the region that meet that target. And there's a chart that a map that Appalachian Voices put together based on 2012 data. The average poverty rate in the United States was 15.9%. And what we did was calculated a weighted average poverty rate for each electric utility service territory in the Southeast. And almost throughout the whole region, as you can see, the residents served by electric utilities, and most of the utilities that you're seeing in the darker colors are rural electric cooperative members, are at or above the national average for poverty rate. We also calculated the average electricity bill cost burden for all utility service territories in the Southeast, and at the time, the Federal Energy Information Administration calculated the average cost burden for residents throughout the U.S. as 2.7%. And again, as you can see, most of the Southeast is at or above that level, reaching as high as 7% for just electricity bills. And that's notable because particularly in rural areas, while the average low-income energy burden may be 8%, that percentage is going to be much higher when you factor in non-electric heating bills, which are pretty significant in a number of these states. For instance, in Tennessee, approximately 40% of residents heat with non-electric sources. So just another illustration. And that energy waste has a very substantial impact. This chart shows 4 of the states where the EIA had state energy, actually detailed energy data for residents. It's from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey. And for the 4 of the 11 states in the Southeast, the average energy cost per home was approximately around $2,000 a year for each home. And going back to that energy flow-through chart from LBNL, I made a calculation of what the lost money for those families in those states would be when we assume a 20% energy waste and a 35% energy waste. And the results are pretty staggering, as you can see. That results in just 1 year, in 2009, residents in those 4 states wasted or spent, as a result of energy waste, between $6 and $11 billion as an approximation, more than they otherwise would have. And when you look at the ACEEE report on the economic impact of energy efficiency, avoided utility costs result in 1.16 times the local value-added benefits compared to spending on utility bills. And so when we estimate if those dollars have been spent in the economy rather than on utility bills, that results in a lost potential value-added amount of $1 to $1.8 billion in a single year in just those 4 states. So when you think about extrapolating that throughout the Southeast, that is a significant loss of economic potential that energy efficiency could help solve. And to reiterate one more time, so I think it's obvious by now that energy costs are an economic burden for low-income residents and an economic loss for our communities. But we wanted to provide this illustration. Appalachian Voices ran a home energy makeover contest where we were able to provide a total of $5,000 in free home energy retrofits to 3 homes. And we got 40 complete applications and found that the average energy cost burden was 8%. As you saw, not all of those homes were low income. A lot of the homes were, and that's why you see that the range was anywhere from 3 to 28% on an annual basis. And 1/4 of all those applicants spent nearly 1/6 of their annual income on energy costs, and in the winter months saw that burden rise to up to almost 50%. So that was a real-world illustration in Western North Carolina of what that energy burden might look like. So, but energy efficiency is obviously an economic opportunity. And to quote ACEEE again, they found that avoided utility costs result in basically 16% greater value-added benefit compared to spending on utility bills. And in 2004, approximately $43 billion was spent on efficient equipment and services that support 1.6 million jobs in that single year, and that was over 12 years ago. But I found that their statement here that it is imperative for the U.S. to harness even more of the available efficiency resource to improve productivity and maintain economic competitiveness in the years to come. And that's kind of the significance of not only this webinar, but also advancing discussions around how we take advantage of the energy efficiency opportunity. Another recent report came out finding that there was a total of $279 billion in potential investment in energy efficiency throughout the U.S. What's significant of that, and I believe that to be probably a conservative estimate, what's significant is that the greatest potential for that investment was in the residential sector. And they also estimated an average of 11.8 full-time direct or indirect jobs per $1 million invested. So when we think about what $182 billion or more could mean in terms of job creation, it's pretty substantial. And I'm going to skip a couple, but I want to just point to the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. They did a economic impact analysis of investments through, I believe it was the Better Buildings program in certain Southeast, in different projects throughout the Southeast. And I'd recommend that folks take a look at that report because they also found a substantial economic impact in terms of output economic output per $1 million of investment, and also jobs created. And their jobs created number includes the direct, indirect, and induced jobs, whereas the 11.8 figure that I just mentioned is only direct and indirect. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a couple slides. This just is another illustration of the percent of total households throughout the Southeast that are greater than 35 years old, and obviously older homes are likely to have a greater potential for energy efficiency improvements or greater need. And there are 9.6 million homes throughout the region that, or a third of all homes, that meet that criteria. And finally, so if 1 in 4 of those homes only received approximately $7,500 per home, which is the level that we're seeing through on-bill financing programs, it could have a significant impact as well. $40 billion in total investment, over 450,000 direct and indirect jobs created, $2.6 billion in savings for residents each year, and $420 million in value-added economic impact per year. So that's where we can get if we can expand energy efficiency investments to that level. So to seize that opportunity, what's needed, in our opinion, is a recognition of the problem and the opportunity, but also a willingness of all stakeholders, including utilities, to recognize that there is a problem and that we can solve it and start taking steps to achieving that. Workforce development, particularly in rural areas, is going to be an important aspect of that effort, as well as education and outreach. Through our own efforts, Appalachian Voices has found that while some folks are very knowledgeable and very aware of their energy bills and what they need to improve the efficiency of their homes, a lot of folks are not. And they're not the only ones that could benefit from education and outreach. There's stakeholders throughout I would say, the value chain for energy efficiency that we're finding definitely benefit and get more interested in energy efficiency and on-bill financing when we sit down and talk to them. But most important, we need to get that capital out there. And it needs to be made available not only to those who can afford or take advantage of traditional lending opportunities, but we need access to capital for renters of all income levels, homeowners and renters of all income levels, regardless of credit scores or other traditional lending criteria, because that's really where the greatest need is, as well as the greatest potential benefit. Which finally brings us to what you all came here to talk about and to learn more about, on-bill financing, on-bill energy efficiency finance. And I want to note that not only on this call, but throughout the region, there are a lot of folks who have developed a very in-depth knowledge and understanding around on-bill financing. And so pretty much no matter what state you live or operate in throughout the Southeast region, there's somebody either close or nearby who that you can learn more from and that you can start talking to about how to promote on-bill financing in your communities or in your state. And it's been pretty impressive, and a lot of credit must go to Dr. Holmes-Hummel for engaging a lot of advocates and other stakeholders around on-bill financing and enhancing all of our knowledge. But generally, what is on-bill finance? It is a financial instrument for financing comprehensive energy efficiency, renewable energy, or even water system improvements on a bill that is paid by a home or a business or even local government agency. And they can take multiple forms. With utility programs, historically we've seen mostly loan products. And in the general frame of on-bill financing, those are referred to as on-bill recovery or on-bill repayment programs. But now when we talk about on-bill finance, we're referring mostly to the tariff-based approach to on-bill financing, and that's what we're going to talk more about. But it's important to note that there's other types of on-bill financing. Again, I mentioned renewable energy and water system improvements. Utility on-bill financing can cover energy efficiency and renewable energy, or electric or gas utilities can. But the property assessed clean energy finance model, which is expanding throughout the U.S., but has really taken off in a couple of states, is a way to finance these improvements through your property tax bill. And with utility on-bill finance, the utility, this is just generally how it works, the utility finances or pays the upfront cost for energy efficiency improvements, and then that customer and I put customer in quotes because in the case of rural electric cooperatives, for instance, they're referred to as members, repays the utility for that investment through a new charge on their utility bill until that investment is paid off. So it's full cost recovery for the utility. And then the customer receives the benefits. They receive the energy savings, potentially lower energy bills, and enhanced comfort, and in many cases, enhanced health and safety of their home, which is something that we're hoping that a lot more health advocates start focusing on energy efficiency, because that's a great way to lower air quality and other health problems in the home. So tariffed on-bill finance models, these are relatively new, and they take different forms, but are essentially more or less the same model. One is an on-bill loan with debt service through a tariff. That is exemplified by the Help My House model in South Carolina, and we're going to be providing a number of case studies that cover some of these models. Then there's the Efficiency Paid Improvement Costs, or EPIC, on-bill tariff model. This was developed by a company called Sustainable Environments, located out of Western North Carolina, headed up by our good friend Christopher Bourne, who I believe is on this call. Then there's the Pay-As-You-Save model, which is the foundation model for a number of programs that exist now, both the HouseSmart Kentucky and HouseSmart Kansas program, the new Upgrade to Save program in North Carolina, and the HELP, or Home Energy Lending Program, Pay-As-You-Save program through Ouachita Electric in Arkansas. And there's a number of key aspects of tariffed on-bill financing. First, the utility provides the upfront capital to finance all cost-effective energy efficiency improvements. And I want to mention that Appalachian Voices and our partners are willing to put together another webinar that kind of takes a deep dive into the details of on-bill financing, both the structure of the operation and the needs for scaling up. But generally, the utility is covering the upfront cost for the customer, and that's a significant piece of it. And then that cost is recovered through a fixed charge on the customer's bill that is less than the estimated savings. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means through the case studies. The obligation to repay the utility is tied to the meter and not the customer, and that's a very key piece of tariffed on-bill financing. The tariff means that it's a charge that reflects a repayment for an investment by the utility in that meter. So there's no consumer loan, no debt obligation, and that repayment obligation to the utility transfers between successor customers at that site. And that's significant because that opens it up to renters, multifamily tenants, typically homes or properties that don't have much of an incentive for investing in energy efficiency. Because if you're a renter, you're not going to go out and improve the insulation of your unit or upgrade your heating system if you're going to be leaving in a couple of years and if you don't own the property. And then, if needed, eligibility is determined by bill payment history instead of credit scores, as I mentioned, which really expands access to the financing for customers who have poor credit, for instance. And so the overarching message here is that tariffed on-bill financing expands the potential customer base for allowing for energy efficiency investments, for providing financing for energy efficiency investments. And here's how it generally works. This was put together by Home Summit at Clean Energy Works. You have a capital provider that can be utility funds, or it can be an outside source from private lenders or federal sources, which we're going to talk about. And the utility then invests in, as I mentioned, comprehensive, cost-effective energy efficiency improvements on a property through the meter. They pay local contractors to conduct those improvements, and then the customer and successors at the site benefit from the energy efficiency upgrades to the home, and then through that extra tariff, they repay the utility, which then repays the capital provider. So that's a simplified form of how tariff on-bill financing works. And while there are it sounds like an easy model for financing energy efficiency improvements. It's really not. And if we do the second webinar, we'll really dive into a lot of the sort of challenges or a lot of the time and effort needed and decisions that need to be made to develop and implement an on-bill financing program. But regardless, given the scale of the economic and energy savings potential of expanding on-bill financing throughout the Southeast, it's definitely worth that effort because it does truly offer the greatest potential for achieving and maximizing the economic and environmental benefits of energy efficiency in the Southeast. And with that, I have to share a inspirational video that illustrates why.
In my prior post at the United States Department of Energy, I was well briefed that within the lifespan of my generation, we need to achieve 100% clean energy worldwide. That quest calls for $1 trillion of investment every year for decades. That's why I'm here to introduce you to Pay As You Save, a scalable financing solution that offers all consumers the opportunity to access cost-effective energy efficiency and renewables with a proven utility business model. This is the powerful nature of Pay As You Save based on a utility investment model. Everywhere the grid reaches today, we have utilities that are recovering their investments with an agreement with customers called a tariff. Champions for distributed energy solutions don't enjoy tariff authority, which has led us to develop alternatives like loans and leases. The technologies are scalable, but the financing solutions we have today for distributed energy solutions are not. Pay As You Save is a game changer, and here's how it works. The utility invests in energy upgrades at a customer site, like better building efficiency or rooftop solar. The utility pays the installer directly, so the customer pays nothing up front for the upgrades they choose. The utility uses a tariff then to recover its investments on the monthly bill using a pay-as-you-save charge that is less than the estimated savings generated by the upgrade. That means that the customer is enjoying immediate and sustained net positive cash flow. And until the utility completes recovery of its investment, the tariff and the pay-as-you-save charge that's based upon it transfers automatically to future customers at that site who continue to benefit from the investment. We've seen remarkable results from several utilities in the United States that have such programs, particularly those that are serious about reaching markets that are hard to serve. Look, renters, low-income households, credit-strapped public sector entities, you know that it has been difficult for them to join the clean energy economy. Pay As You Save clears some of those most serious barriers by offering a solution that has no consumer debt, lien, or loans. When compared to debt-based programs, Pay As You Save has a bigger impact for four main reasons. First, the addressable market is double the size because nearly everyone is eligible. And when customers are presented with a Pay As You Save offer, they say yes more than half the time, which is 5 times other typical programs. And when they say yes, the size of the project they're willing to undertake is more than double the size.
Okay. It's one of our favorite videos, and again, that's one of the many champions out there for on-bill financing, and I realized that there was a lot of duplicity there, so I apologize. But the point is, again, on-bill financing is one of the best solutions, if not the best solution for achieving that economic and energy savings potential throughout the region. And capital itself is not a problem. There are various funding sources available for most utilities. Either, again, the utility using its own balance sheet, cash that is on hand. But there's also a number of programs available through the United States Department of Agriculture. One of the newest is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Loan Program, which is a loan guarantee program that's been around for a couple of years now and provides access to up as much as $6 billion of total capital as the EECLP, it competes with all of the other programs that fall within that $6 billion, but that does show the potential for annual capital available for utilities to implement on-bill financing programs. The Rural Energy Savings Program is a 0% program also through USDA's Rural Utilities Service that we expect to be available in June, and that is going to be specifically for on-bill financing programs. Although the amount of capital available on an annual basis, first of all, it relies on annual congressional appropriations of the credit subsidy to allow for the 0% financing, but the limit of that subsidy also limits the total amount of funding available. So we expect that for this upcoming year, that will be capped at around $50 million for 1 year. So although the EECLP comes with a higher cost of capital, the Rural Energy Savings Program or the EECLP has more money available for rural utilities to tap into each year. Although obviously the 0% cost of capital allows for, through the Rural Energy Savings Program, will allow for a lower cost of capital passed on to the residents who participate. There's also the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program. That's also limited. It's also limited to the amount that can be applied for and received each year by rural utilities. But private capital is becoming more interested in on-bill financing and energy efficiency investments more broadly, and is more appropriate for scaled-up investments in many ways, particularly as the on-bill financing market starts to prove itself, and we have a lot more data available to draw upon to allow private lenders to be able to provide low-cost capital with fewer eligibility requirements. So that's kind of the goal there. And then there's also complementary federal funding that's available. Through the state energy program, states can apply for funds that can be used to help defray startup costs, to help lower the cost for the development, and also for the securitization of or the credit enhancements associated with on-bill financing programs. And then many of us know about the Weatherization Assistance Program. Those are funds specifically for low-income energy efficiency improvements, but they can be used to buy down the cost of some investments. And the existence of those funds highlights the importance of something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, is developing networks of stakeholders that help to maximize the effectiveness of on-bill financing investments. And these programs, as I mentioned, they're a little complicated, and the way they're set up, the way they're designed, ultimately will have an impact on the level of energy and cost savings that can be achieved. And so you see a number of the factors here. The funding source, as I mentioned, for instance, between the ECLIP program, the EECLP, and Rural Energy Savings Program, the cost of capital associated with each of those could lower or enhance the ultimate energy and cost savings. The criteria for cost effectiveness, that sort of plays into the cost recovery period as well as the cost of capital. What is the term for the customer to repay the utility investment in energy efficiency? The longer the term, obviously, the more impact you can have, because you can finance a greater number of retrofits. And then what is the net savings goal that is aimed to be achieved? For instance, are the repayments capped at 90% of the estimated savings on an annual basis, or 75%? So all of that plays into what can be financed cost effectively over the cost recovery period. And the benefits are many for all stakeholders involved. The customer obviously sees lower energy costs, enhanced comfort and health in their home, which is a very big issue and therefore a very, very big selling point to residents to take the leap and participate in on-bill financing programs. Also the environmental benefits. For the utility, customer service, particularly for rural electric cooperatives, is really important, and they always talk about that. They even, on an annual basis, they will do a survey, customer satisfaction survey, and they really pay a lot of attention to that. And we've already talked about the economic and environmental benefits, but this kind of shows that this really is a win-win for not only the economy and environment, but also the utility and obviously the customer. And we're sort of running into a time bump here, but after the case studies, we're almost done. So I want to highlight some of the case studies. One of the first tariffed on-bill financing programs to be developed was by Midwest Energy in 2007 in Kansas. Midwest Energy has approximately 50,000 electric and gas customers. They serve both sectors. It was funded and continues to be funded by multiple funding sources. They relied on state funds, and now they're as well as federal Recovery Act funds, but now they're using private capital through the Cooperative Finance Corporation. It is a tariff-based program. Both owners and renters are eligible. They do use bill payment history to determine eligibility, and they have a fairly long cost recovery term. It's capped at 15 years or 75% of the average measure life, but no more than 15 years. A low cost of capital as a result of their source of funding, and they use a cost recovery charge cap at 90% of the estimated savings. And we haven't talked about this, but the goal of that is so that the participant receives a net reduction in their energy bills even though they have a new charge on their bill on an annual basis. But they do not guarantee those savings. None of the utilities do, and that's because in some cases you're going to have something go wrong with the modeling or the energy efficiency improvements, and the utility and the contractors do everything they can to fix any problems that are a result of any situation where the utility or the contractor is liable. But you're not going to get a net savings in all cases as signified by the Help My House program in South Carolina. The HouseMart Kansas program has been the most successful so far. They've completed 1,400 retrofits with over approximately 2,500 total energy audits being conducted. So that results in a 57% conversion rate, which goes back to Holmes Hummel on the video saying that more than half the time they say yes. And that is, because of how these programs are structured, that is a significantly higher rate than we see with other programs. And they've invested, the utility itself has invested $8.3 million, but they allow the customer to contribute to the project cost in order to make additional retrofits pencil out. And while you wouldn't think that customers would contribute a substantial amount, they actually have in this case. And as you see by the $2.3 million, I guess, invested by those customers. Average project cost of $7,400. The average customer contribution is $1,600. And overall, they've achieved approximately a 25% energy savings and a net dollar savings of $120 a year. And one of the things that you always hear utilities talk about is risk of loss. But in all these programs, we see no more of approximately a 0.1% loss rate in terms of money lost because of defaults or other issues such as a property being destroyed or otherwise, or a bankruptcy or otherwise. So very successful model with the HouseMart Kansas model. And then the Help My House program in South Carolina was a pilot initiated in 2011 by the state co-op trade association and the state generation and transmission entity. At the time, it was motivated by an energy efficiency goal of achieving 10% energy efficiency sales or a percent of retail sales by 2022. And while 8 co-ops have participated in the pilot, after that 1-year pilot year, currently 5 co-ops have moved forward on expanding their own programs. And the Environmental Energy Study Institute, which is a great resource for on-bill financing programs, and they received some funding to provide electric utilities free consultation in designing on-bill financing programs. They were heavily involved in developing and then analyzing the Help My House program. The program was initially structured as a consumer loan with debt service treated as a tariffed charge. That required state legislation to convert that loan model product to a tariff-based financing program. And they have a maximum loan term of 10 years at 2.5% interest. They are more or less achieving repayment over 10 years, but they also have no upfront payment, everything else associated with what we have talked about with tariffed on-bill financing. And they also had significant impacts. For the pilot, they were focused on achieving the greatest amount of savings possible. And so they directly targeted and marketed to homes that consumed over 30,000 kilowatt hours a year for the most part on average. But that also shows you that those homes that have the highest energy burden and the highest energy use achieve a greater percent savings. With the Help My House program, it was 34% energy savings, which translates into, because they capped their repayment at 90% of the estimated savings, and they're achieving that level of savings. And I apologize, the average payback is supposed to be 10 years here. The participants are pocketing on an annual basis, even after repaying the utilities back, co-ops back, almost $300 a year, and that's pretty significant. And that provides an illustration of, a lot of these programs, you don't want to discriminate against non-high energy use or non-low income homes, but when you're directly marketing to those homes, then you're going to see a greater amount of savings, particularly if they can benefit because it's a debt-free, tariff-based program. One of the newest programs is the Upgrade to Save program in North Carolina, and I'm going to just kind of focus on this one because it's still new, but it has a couple of elements that are different to it. It is strictly based on the pay-as-you-save program design. The Roanoke Electric Cooperatives was the first co-op in the United States to receive an energy efficiency and conservation loan guarantee for tariff-based on-bill financing, and they received $6 million that they'll be spending over the next 4 years. They're allowed to go back if they spend that out sooner, but the way they structure the program, they have their cost recovery charge capped at 75% of the estimated savings, but they're able to achieve that, as you'll see in a second, because they are transferring the value of their energy, or a portion of the value of their energy efficiency credits that used to be purchased from outside of their membership in order to meet the state renewable portfolio standard. They are now passing that value in to some degree on to participants in the on-bill financing program, and that's really has an amazing impact on what can be financed cost effectively, while also recognizing that energy efficiency has a value as a resource to the utility within their system. So I encourage folks to look into this model in greater detail. And these are the impacts that they've modeled. They haven't gone through a full year of their first retrofits, but it's in an extent almost unbelievable, but it's also a reflection of how they set up the program and of the membership, of the need among their membership, because they have a long line at the door of folks who want to participate. So almost $7,000 average cost of the upgrades. Average payment for that energy efficiency value is almost $500. So they're buying down the project cost by that amount on average, and they're saving on a monthly basis an average of $120 and a net average of almost $60, which translates to over approximately $700 a year, and that's outstanding. That obviously will have a significant economic benefit for the participants. And while their target is 25% net savings, or capping the repayment at 75% of the savings, they're actually seeing savings that result in the payments being only 50% of those savings, which is how they're achieving that net dollar savings of such a high amount. Okay, and since we're getting to the end, I only have a few more slides. There is one other model, the HELP model in Arkansas. That's a new one as well. But I just have a couple more slides, so I want to get to the question and answer. But the point is that while the utilities and related sort of grass tops stakeholders have a huge role to play, it's really going to take all of us, the whole community of stakeholders, to achieve that potential that we discussed earlier and really maximize our investments in energy efficiency throughout the Southeast. And one example of this is the North Carolina On-Bill Working Group and the work of members of the working group to reach out to the communities that they serve. And that working group currently consists of Appalachian Voices, Environmental Defense Fund, Southern Environmental Law Center, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, University of North Carolina's Environmental Finance Center, and the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. That is the core group, but we also have a network of affiliate groups that include community service agencies, other advocacy organizations from around the state. We're working directly with the State Electric Membership Corporation, co-op members. I mean, it's an amazing network that has been built up over the past couple of years, and it is so far shown to be effective in expanding the conversation around the need for on-bill financing, the opportunity for rural electric cooperatives to provide on-bill financing to their members, and what the benefits would be, and what's needed to build up that infrastructure and that support so that all co-ops across the state can offer that for their members. And then we have a much more limited network, but also network of ourselves in Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and Southern Organizing for Community Empowerment, as well as electric cooperatives, the State Energy Office and State Co-op Association, and local weatherization agencies and others in Tennessee that's less formal, but is proving to be as effective in not only promoting on-bill financing, but also developing those local and statewide networks that are going to be necessary to combine resources, whether financial or administrative or otherwise, so that it's not just the utility that's putting this financing out there and doing the marketing and the education and everything else, but a whole community of stakeholders who can combine all their respective resources to maximize that impact. So I recommend or offer folks to contact us to learn more about either of those efforts. With that, I will stop, and sorry for going a few minutes over and running through a lot of that, but it's a lot, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Rory. Hey, everybody, this is Amber again, and we have a couple questions that folks have submitted. So as we're addressing some of the questions folks have already raised, I'll just encourage folks, if you do have a question you've been saving, to go ahead and type it in now, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that. And as I mentioned before, I am the Energy Savings Outreach Coordinator for North Carolina. You see Amy Kelly, who is the Energy Savings Outreach Coordinator for Tennessee. So if you are interested in getting more involved in the outreach efforts on either of these campaigns, please do send us an email, and we'd love to plug you in. There's lots of different ways that different types of groups and individuals can get involved. So just to jump into some of these questions, Rory, I'll just read these out and you can take a shot at answering them. Somebody asked towards the beginning if in the low-income statistics you presented, whether multifamily was included in that?
It depends on which chart we're talking about, but let me refer back to my note slides here. The earlier charts, the one on single-family homes, that did not include that. No, so I'll just say no. These are all single-family homes, and the reason I did that was, and I forgot to refer to this, but it was because of the ACEEE or the Deutsche Bank funding that the greatest potential for investment was in single-family homes. So I just failed to make that connection, but I do have that data if folks are available, if folks are interested.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have another question here, someone asking, would it be a huge capital burden for the electric co-ops if a lot of members signed up for a program like this? And usually, how long does it take to recover the investment through on-bill financing?
Okay. So to address the question of capital burden, that does, so it's a complicated answer, but simply, if the co-op or other utility has just launched an on-bill financing program, they're not likely to be able to absorb 1,000 homes in the first year, for instance. So that is a question that is being faced by one of our partner co-ops right now, because they only put a limited amount of capital into their pilot phase, but they are seeing a significant amount of interest. And so it'll be interesting to see how they're able to, I guess, resolve that issue. But a high level of interest is good, because that will show any utility that there's a high enough level of demand to where they should go out and obtain more capital and expand the program. But that can be a problem at the onset, and you really don't want any customers that you're marketing this to, particularly if you're marketing it broadly, to be disappointed or to not be able to access that financing if it's supposedly available. In Roanoke's case, they have a small enough membership, and they got a large enough level of capital from USDA to where they're able to absorb a good portion of the demand they're seeing so far. But it's also, I mean, they're heading toward a waiting list, and if they don't have one already, which is a good thing. And again, something that will likely get them to increase the amount of capital available and expand the infrastructure to support a higher level of participation. And as to how long, the phrase financing cost-effective investments means that the utility will only finance using its capital what can be paid back over the term over the maximum term that they've set for the program through the savings. And this is only with the tariffed on-bill financing program that has a goal of reducing the net energy bill on an annual basis. But typically we see with tariffed on-bill financing programs, we see 10 to 15 years. And again, in the HouseMart Kansas and the HouseMart Kentucky case, and I'm sure also with Roanoke's program, if one improvement only pencils out halfway, then they provide that participant the opportunity to buy down the remainder of that cost for that improvement, so that it can be included in the financing, at least part way, and overall what the utility puts in can be paid back through the savings over the recovery period.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. How do you see energy efficiency on-bill financing programs interacting with new air sealing standards and indoor air quality?
That I don't believe I'm properly qualified to answer that. I would expect that if new standards result in a higher cost of certain improvements, then that could, depending on the associated level of savings achieved, which I assume would be higher than current standards, that may impact in one way or another the cost effectiveness of air sealing, for instance. Indoor air quality standards, if there are certain requirements associated with those new standards that increase the, not to use the word burden, but increase the administrative requirements associated with conducting energy efficiency improvements, then that could also impact the cost effectiveness. But I don't have any sense of to what degree that may happen.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, another question we have here is, what are some of the main barriers or concerns for customers to upgrade through on-bill financing?
Well, generally, I mean, this speaks to the importance of the educational aspect of offering on-bill financing to your customers, because any person who sees the term finance is going to be a little hesitant. It sounds like a loan, and the concept of financing that doesn't create ongoing, well, I guess that doesn't require you to carry the debt with you or pay off the remaining principal should you move out of that property, is a foreign concept. So this is something that requires a good amount of education to get folks comfortable with it. But ultimately, when you are able to tell them that they don't pay anything up front, that if they do move out or sell their home, they aren't required to pay off any remaining principal, so there's no debt, and then ultimately that the goal, at least, is to finance only those investments that result in a net reduction in their energy bills. Those are three pretty good selling points to any customer, and I think that will get a lot of folks into the program, as you saw with the conversion rate. If you go in and you show them what can be improved and how much it'll save them, even though they're paying something off, and then you say that if they move out, they don't have to keep paying that off, you're going to get a lot of folks to say yes, more than 50% on average. So I think that kind of speaks to that issue. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be that you say, hey, we have this program, and everybody jumps into it. There definitely is an educational component required.
Okay, great, thanks. And then there's kind of another question on the flip side of that. Does the payback by customers really cover all investments made by the utilities? If there is no profit left, what is the incentive for utilities to do so?
Okay, yeah, that's a slide that I left out and that I would love to dive in on a second webinar. But just to go back to a prior slide, and I will go back since it was just right here. Pardon me. So this one here, this shows a couple, right? And so for the utility, there is no profit, and a lot of these co-ops will actually tell you that in some cases they lose a little bit of money, depending on how they set up the program, and what their like energy audit format is, whether they do a test in and test out together, that increase the cost. But depending on the utility's mission, and I'm going to speak to rural electric cooperatives, they are owned by their members, and they do see member service, member satisfaction, and community development as real, in many cases, as real goals of the co-op. But also in a lot of cases, the utility has administrative costs associated with dealing with high bill complaints or inability to pay for a lot of customers during peak winter or summer months. That takes time and cost. But also they have energy and demand costs that, for instance, if they are paying, in the case of rural electric cooperatives that get their electricity from Duke Energy or a state co-op G&T, they're paying higher prices during peak demand, and by shaving that, they save money. And we have a financial model done for a co-op in Tennessee that values that for a single home, and it's pretty substantial. Not every co-op is on that same financial structure to where they will see these financial benefits to the utility and say, oh, that more than covers our administrative costs associated with offering this program. But in many cases, you are going to see that, and it is a value that the utility needs to recognize and take into account when they're looking at the economic case for the utility, the business case for the utility to offer this to their customers.
All right, thanks, Rory. And I know we're kind of running a little over time. We have several other questions still, but maybe we can just read out one more of the questions, and then we can answer anything we didn't individually to folks who asked. So I think this is a good one to end on. Someone asked, what is the best way to get a working group like in North Carolina and Tennessee started?
Call us. As I mentioned, these networks are something that we value, but it's also something that's very important. And it's not just, it's something that anyone interested in putting a working group or other similar collaborative together to advance the discussion and also bring resources to the table to utilities that are interested in developing on-bill financing programs. It has a significant impact. I mean, one organization or one business alone cannot do it all. And so the North Carolina On-Bill Working Group or Appalachian Voices and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy in Tennessee, we'd love to talk to you about it. You're welcome to join one of our stakeholder calls on the North Carolina side to learn more about it and learn how we formed and how we've grown and what we're offering. But there's also other models out there, and I would encourage folks to join the Advancing Equity and Opportunity Collaborative for the Southeast. There's a lot of great folks who have different networks of different types on many different issues that are part of that collaborative, and that's grown and has a lot of great folks who you can speak to as well, and we're more than happy to connect you with those. And I want to invite folks who haven't been able to ask your question, please email me, rory@appvoices.org. I'll answer every question that you have, and I do apologize for going over on my time, but I'd also be happy to talk to you on the phone. So thank you for joining us today.
Great, thanks everybody. We will catch you again later.
Take care, folks.